Hello there, how's it going? Welcome to another Crime Dive. My name is Crystal Sky, and if you're anything like me, you find yourself drawn to true crime cases. So, like many others out there, I've decided to make videos about it. If you are also drawn to true crime, and you want to feel better about your makeup skills, you should absolutely like, subscribe, and let's hang out together every Tuesday where I will take a deep dive look into a true crime case while slapping on the old clown paint. So yeah, how's it going? How are things going for ya? Thank you again so much for dealing with my inconsistency there for the last few weeks. It's just been a lot going on, which reminds me, I will not upload the first week of August. So we have this upload and then I'll upload next week. But the first week of August, I'm actually going to take off because starting on Monday, the 31st of July, I have to call in and see if I have to go in for jury duty. And apparently I have to call in every day, Monday through Friday, and see if I have to get called in. So yeah, just to, make things easier on myself and give me a chance to catch up on some things, I'm going to take the first week of August off. And then, assuming I don't get called or anything like that, we'll go back to normal uploads on Tuesday. Yeah, so sorry. This whole year I feel has just been very inconsistent for me. There's just been so much in my life going on, and it seems life is determined to make me off schedule. Thank you so much for, putting up with it, and truly appreciate it. Sorry, I'm not the best at communication. Sometimes, time just slips by me, and before I know it, I'm like, oh damn, it's already Tuesday, and I haven't said anything or anything like that. So yeah, thank you so much for putting up with it, and I'll try to be better. I will, I promise. Okay, well, let's move on to today's case, which is actually a case that I came across on Reddit. I subscribed to quite a few of the true crime subreddits on there, and there was one person who posted this case, and it was just really fascinating to me. So today we'll be talking about Kraig Kahler, all right? And he is a family annihilator. And you know how everyone, likes to talk about, serial killers or, mass killers, spree killers or something like that. That's kind of what draws people or really sticks with them, The family annihilator cases, that's what they do to me. They really stick in my mind. They're just bizarre to me. It's so incredible that someone can just treat their loved ones, their family, the people that they're supposed to, die for and sacrifice for and supposed to, love unconditionally, can just sit there and take their life. It's just wild to me. So today, we'll be getting into Kraig Kahler, who, annihilated his female family, and we'll get all into it. There's a lot to get into. And because this is a true crime case, just be forewarned, we're talking about a lot of, adult themes, a description of crime scenes and whatnot. So just, be forewarned. And without further ado, let's get all into the Kaylor family. So James Kraig Kahler, he went by Kraig, his middle name, was born on January 15th, 1963, in a Topeka, Kansas suburb called Meriden in Boone County to parents Wayne and Patricia Kaylor. He attended the local high school there and graduated from there before heading off to Kansas State University to study engineering. Now, while at KSU, he would meet his future wife, a woman named Karen. Karen was also from Kansas, and she had graduated from a local Wichita high school, and that had been in 1983. Karen was born Karen Hetrick, and she was born on July 30th, 1965 in Topeka, Kansas, and her parents were Paul and Patricia Hetrick. Karen also had a brother named Bill and a sister named Lynn. So Karen and Kraig dated throughout university, and Karen ended up dropping out of school in order to marry Kraig. They married on December 28th, 1985 after dating for 2 years. Kraig had graduated with his engineering degree that same year, 1985, and he received his bachelor's in electrical engineering. And he would end up in a long work history of engineering jobs, and they spanned quite a few states, and the Kaylors lived in quite a few places. He worked jobs in places like Lee Summit, Missouri, Colorado Springs, Colorado, and Duncan, Oklahoma. Kraig and Karen would end up having 3 children together, 2 daughters named Emily and Lauren, and 1 son who they named Sean. Now, Emily was the oldest of the Kaylor children, and she had been born in Colorado Springs, Colorado on April 8th, 1991. Lauren was the second oldest, and she had been born on May 10th, 1993. And she had been born in Greenville, Texas. And Sean was the youngest. I'm not quite sure his exact birth date, but I believe he was born sometime in like 1998, 1999, also in Texas. The Kaylor family would actually end up settling in Texas for quite a while. For about 10 years, they settled in the city of Weatherford, which was located in Parker County. Now, in 1992, before Emily had been born, Kraig had gotten a job in Texas and was for the city of Greenville as an engineering and operations manager, and he worked this position until about 1997. Meanwhile, on top of being a full-time mother, Karen was also a personal trainer at the local gym, the Powerhouse Gym, and it is said that both Kraig and Karen had pretty successful careers, and just like they all are described, they were described as just being the perfect, happy, picture-perfect family, you know? We know how this story goes, right? In 1999, Kraig was then made the city utilities director for the city of Weatherford, and the Kaylors would end up making a lot of community ties in the city of Weatherford. The city manager, Jerry Blaisdell, described the family as being very active, having a lot of connections. Kraig and Karen were part of the Rotary Club, and both Emily and Lauren played in a community band. So Kraig would have this job for almost 10 years-ish before he got another job in Columbia, Missouri. And in July of 2008, he took the job in Columbia as director of the Water and Light Department for the city. He said he was looking for, quote, larger opportunities for his family, and he earned $150,000 annual salary, making him the highest paid employee in the entire city of Columbia. Municipal leaders had actually revised their payroll rules in order to pay Kraig this salary. Yeah, must be nice, right? Now, Kraig first moved to Columbia in the summer of 2008, and the plan was for Karen and the kids to join him in the fall. I'm guessing maybe they were finishing up maybe some school stuff or something. Now, depending on who you ask and who you believe, there is some slight differences in what people say happened in the spring/summer of that year, 2008. But what we do know for a fact is at this time, another woman would enter the Kaylor relationship, but not in the way that you're probably thinking. This woman's name was Sunny Reese, and she worked as a personal trainer along with Karen at the Powerhouse Gym. Karen and Sunny had actually met in January of 2006. I think that's when Sunny had gotten hired at the gym. But during this time period, some people say as early as March of 2008, but around this general time period, Karen and Sunny would end up engaged in a romantic relationship. You were probably thinking, oh, Kraig's gonna have an affair with Sunny, right? Yeah, no, it was Karen who ended up having an affair with Sunny. Sunny contends that this relationship was facilitated all by Kraig. He's the one that started everything. She said Kraig had fantasies of the 3 of them engaging in threesomes and sex together and stuff. Even bringing both women roses at some point, I think for Valentine's Day or a birthday or something like that. He brought orange and red for Sunny and pink for Karen. And this is according to Sunny. Quote, he agreed to everything. He was very pleased. There was never any secret. There was never one moment when he didn't know. When things became different, Kraig knew from the get-go and was very accepting and wanted to be involved. But that wasn't an option. Sunny says that there's even a text message that has Kraig initiating this relationship and stating outright he wants a threesome and all that. But that text message has never been recovered or found or anything like that. There are other sources that say Kraig had some bizarre sexual fantasy of actually Karen engaging in sex with another man while he watched. But Kraig has always denied this. And to this day, he maintains that he only consented to the relationship with Sunny after Karen had asked him if she could be involved with her. He claims that it was all Karen's idea and that he loved his wife so much, he was willing to consent to this relationship. Either way, so we don't know exactly, how it happened, but what we do know is that, Sunny and Karen ended up engaged in a romantic affair. And what we also know is that this this relationship between Sonny and Karen grew to be more, all right? The two, like, fell for each other. It became quite serious, which, however you spin it, is not what Kraig intended. And the three of them also, of course, never ended up in, like, a threesome or sexual activities together. Sonny said, quote, "We became extremely close, and the closer we got, she revealed to me some things that were disturbing to me. When you tell someone intimate details of your life, you become emotionally closer. Much of it had to do with her relationship with Kraig and her children and her mother and father." And surprise, surprise, Sonny found out from Karen that the Kaylor's relationship and their marriage was not as picture perfect and happy as it seemed from the outside. Shocker, right? Aren't you shocked? Totally shocked. It's how it always is with these stories, it seems, right? Or with these cases, really. Not really like stories. These are real people. But like, it's always the people, the families, the relationships that look so good from the outside that you're like, man, I wish I had that. And that's why you always say, man, you never know what's going on behind closed doors. Turns out, Kraig was misogynistic, abusive, and very controlling over his wife and family. He made Karen give him, like, every receipt and account for, like, every single penny that she spent. He even refused to buy her a gym membership, by the way, like the gym that she would end up becoming a personal trainer at. Yeah, she wanted a gym membership there, but Kraig refused to pay for it, so she ended up, like, baking and selling cakes on the side to pay for it. Can you believe that? What a fucking prick. Kraig also demanded sex every night, whether or not Karen was in the mood or wanted it, and he would even get physical with her if she refused. In fact, it is said that Kraig didn't even allow phone calls to the home after 8 p.m. because 8:30 is when he would expect sex from Karen. One of Karen's friends would later say that one time she accidentally did call the house like after 8 p.m. and like Karen picked up the phone, and she was like super quiet and she sounded like very like meek and stuff, and she's like, "Oh, like I can't talk, it's after 8, so like, I can't talk or whatever," and she quickly like got off the phone. Yeah, Can you imagine living that as your day-to-day life? And it said the Kaylor's relationship had just grown more abusive and more controlling as the years had gone on, as this stuff, tends to do. And it is said that, it is when Karen got with Sonny that she had confided in her just how bad her marriage was and how miserable her life was in general. And, it seems that, perhaps the Kaylor's relationship had always been abusive. Karen's own mother would later say that she was quite disturbed what she saw in the early days of the relationship, like when they had the first child and stuff. She was quite disturbed by how much her daughter was waiting on Kraig hand and foot, even with like, a baby or two in tow. And she was just really disturbed by that and how little Kraig helped her. So, as this is going on, Karen, is engaged in this relationship with Sonny. As this is going on, the family moved to Colombia in the fall of 2008 as planned. And the relationship between Karen and Sonny, it is said Kraig thought that the relationship would like fizzle out by the time the family moved to Colombia, which was another reason he said he consented to the relationship. But it endured. And the two exchanged, emails daily. They got together through like work trips and like other planned visits and stuff. So the relationship, much to Kraig's dismay, continued, and it endured this move. Emily had graduated high school and was attending her first semester at the St. Louis College of Pharmacy in Missouri. It is said the Kaylor's oldest daughter really loved outdoor activities. She considered Weatherford, Texas, her hometown, and she had been a percussionist in the school band. Now, Lauren, the second oldest, was an honor student, and when the family moved to Columbia, she was in her junior year at Rockbridge High School in Missouri. It is said Lauren, much like her sister, was a very talented musician, was very musically gifted. She, too, was a member of the school's marching band and wind ensemble, where she played the euphonium. Lauren had even had an all-girls garage band back in Weatherford. Emily was in the band as well. They called themselves Days Off, and Lauren played the bass guitar while Emily played the drums. So yeah, the two sisters were definitely very musically gifted. It is said Lauren was pretty popular at school. She had lots and lots of friends because she was just very personable, very outgoing. Her best friend in Columbia would end up being fellow junior Paige Shipma. And she said Lauren was her best friend and confidant. They had many sleepovers, lunches, and late night drives in Paige's car together. And yeah, Paige just, said how how close her and Lauren were. On top of playing in a band together, both Emily and Lauren worked part-time jobs together. They worked at the local Papa Murphy's pizza joint together. And they had a friend and a fellow co-worker named Katie Holthouse. And she also attended school with Lauren. She said of the girls, quote, "They were talkative, they were outgoing. You'd never be able to tell there was something wrong with their dad or their home life. You'd never be able to tell that for sure." Yeah, it said the girls never talked about like their home life, and it was not obvious that, their dad was a controlling, misogynistic prick, They were just happy, outgoing girls. Karen ended up getting another personal training job when the family moved to Columbia, Missouri at some sort of like pre-dawn boot camp. One of her clients, who she actually became pretty good friends with, was a woman named Tracy Wilson Kleekamp. So Karen would lead her group on Mondays and Fridays at the Activity and Recreation Center in Columbia for an hour-long early morning boot camp like training session. During the session, Karen would talk to the group, and they would talk about like their personal goals, what they wanted to, get out of the workout and stuff like that, what they were aiming towards, as well as go on about some details about their lives. Karen's clients, including Tracy, would later say that Karen would always talk about her family. Specifically, she talked about her children and how proud she was and happy she was, how much she loved them. And she never once badmouthed her husband or badmouthed Kraig. Like with Emily and Lauren, you wouldn't have been able to tell that she was actually pretty unhappy in her marriage. So that is what the Kaylor family was up to when they moved to Columbia, Missouri. And remember, throughout all of this, Karen is still maintaining her relationship with Sonny. And on New Year's Eve 2008, after only 5 months in Missouri, the Kaylor's troubles grew worse, and it would come to a head when Kraig violently assaulted his wife. So they were back in Weatherford, Texas. Remember, they had, been there a long time, so they had a lot of, friends and family and stuff back there. So they had come back to Texas to go to a friend's New Year's Eve party. And they were at this New Year's Eve party when all this would happen. So the friends were Dan and Marina Coulter. They were the ones throwing the party. And Sonny was also at this party. Now, apparently at this party, it is said that Karen and Sonny maybe had a little bit too much to drink. I guess they were like sipping from the same wine glass with like 2 straws and sort of like, being affectionate with each other, holding hands, putting their hands in each other's laps, physically touching and openly flirting with each other, or even kissing each other at one point, And it said the Coulters thought this behavior was, quote, inappropriate. Which at first when you hear that, you're just like, oh, well, like, fuck these prudes. But like, I don't know. I guess on one hand, I could get it because it's sort of like, they're hosting the party and they don't want any like awkwardness, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I guess that's the only way I could like justify them saying like, oh, that's inappropriate. It is said the Coulters pressured Karen to end her, quote, lesbian affair. And the next day they had told Sonny to leave the Kaylor marriage alone. But Sonny told them no, she wasn't going to because she was afraid of the abuse that Karen was facing at the hands of Kraig. Though she did apologize to them for her, quote, inappropriate conduct. She did say like, I am sorry for the way we acted at the party. Like, I know that was your party. You're trying to, have a good time and host, and you don't need a bunch of drama. So I am sorry about that. But she said, no, I'm not going to like leave Karen or drop this. Like, not only do I care about her and love her, but like, I'm legitimately worried at the abuse that she's experiencing. Like, you have no idea. Now, after Kraig and Karen had left the Coulters party, it is said that Kraig got very upset with Karen. He thought that she had, quote, misbehaved at the party. And, I guess they kind of got into it, he was just kind of going off on her. And it got to a point where he then shoved her to the point that, like, she fell on the street. The incident left Karen with, like, a head injury, some cuts, like a pulled hamstring and stuff. She later recounted, quote, as a result of misbehavior at a party, he shoved me to get my attention so that I would straighten up. He pushed me hard enough that I hit my head on the street. The struggle resulted in a goose egg on my head, scrapes, and a pulled hamstring. And I know some people be like, oh, well, it was just a shove and like a few scrapes and shit, but like, no, you don't physically put your hands on anyone without their permission, let alone your spouse, let alone the mother of your children. You know what I mean? Sonny would later find Karen that night. I think it was like after the party and after this fight. And she would later say, quote, she was shell-shocked and rocking on the back porch in a little ball and crying. And, that's why Sonny had told the Coulters after they told her to leave the Kaylor marriage alone that she wasn't going to. She told them that she, quote, wanted to protect Karen from Kraig. And she told them about the altercation that they had after they had left the Coulters party. And it was said after this incident and after she had spoken to the Coulters, Sunny then sent Kraig a text message, and it read, quote, "You can't force, threaten, or humiliate Karen like you did yesterday and expect her to love you for it. She doesn't love you, Kraig, not like you think she does. Ask her and you'll see that I'm right by the look in her eyes." Now, it is said after this whole fiasco at the party, like, Sunny's friends just begged her to just disengage from this, they were like, hey, look, I know you care for her and stuff, but like, this is a lot of drama. This is a lot going on right here, and you need to just, disengage yourself for your own sake. But, Sunny loved Karen. She wanted to be with her, and she was, concerned for her safety. There would be another physical confrontation between Kraig and Karen a few days/weeks later in the new year, January of 2009. I guess Kraig brought Karen coffee in bed, and because he had done this, he then demanded sex from her. And after she had refused him, he started tearing at the bed sheets and tearing at her clothes. And she would later say that he just was too strong for her to push away. Quote, "I yelled loud enough for him to stop that my daughters came running from their rooms and got between us. He stopped then." Can you imagine having to run in and save your mother from being sexually assaulted by your father? Isn't that wild? Kraig is such a piece of shit, dude. And is it so obvious that, he doesn't view Karen as a person. He views Karen as his property. And during this same month of January, Sunny, I think, was trying to gently push/encourage Karen to leave Kraig. I guess at one point she sent her an article and it was titled "How to Divorce a Narcissist." But it was finally after this latest abusive incident in the bed that Karen finally decided to file for divorce from Kraig. She had just had it, and after 23 years of marriage, she finally got that courage to step away, and that does take a lot of courage. People always scratch their head oh, why do people stay in abusive relationships? There's so many factors at play. There's so much going on. You have no idea. And so, yeah, good for Karen that she found that strength. It is said that she told Kraig that she was filing for divorce and leaving him for Sunny, and she ended up hiring attorney Daniel Pingleton to represent her in the upcoming divorce. Pingleton would later describe Kraig as, quote, controlling, and detailed some of what Karen had told him. Quote, "The abuse slowly escalated to the point where she was tired of it, and she didn't think it was in her best interest to stay married to him. He was very resistant to the divorce. In a few months, it became fairly contentious, and it became worse as time went on." He said Karen wasn't really concerned for her own safety, though. She was more concerned for the safety of her children, even concerned for Kraig's safety. Quote, "And she worried whether he could hurt himself. Karen was fearful of him, but really she was honestly more afraid he was going to kill himself." He said that Karen had also told him that she believed Kraig was hacking into her emails and was also committing acts of vandalism around her home because, as we'll get into, she eventually moved out with the kids. And then Pingleton went on to describe what he thought of Kraig's behavior based on what his client had told him. Quote, "From the facts I heard, I think he was misogynist." Yeah, after Karen filed for divorce and eventually moved out of the family home with the kids, Kraig never made any effort to see his daughters, only his son. He wanted nothing to do with Emily or Lauren. Nice, right? Meanwhile, Kraig hired his own attorney, Gary Stamper, to represent him in the divorce. Now, after she had, filed for divorce from Kraig, Karen ended up re-enrolling in school. She wanted to complete her degree that she had quit when she met Kraig. She was originally going for a degree in health science, and she actually enrolled in the same school as Emily. Pingleton said, quote, "She was a straight A student, and she was thrilled about it." So yeah, isn't that sweet? Mother and daughter attending, college together, at the same time. I just thought that was super sweet and cool. In fact, they were slated to graduate together. Now, in March 2009, Kraig once again got violent with Karen. She was, in the process of moving out of the family home at this time. She would later say that Kraig held her in a bear hug against the cabinets. He wanted Karen to reconsider the divorce, and when she didn't, he attacked her. She later said, quote, "He asked if he could sit beside me. I got up and he followed me and asked for a hug. I told him no, but he kept asking, insisting, coming toward me with his arms reaching out to me. I continued to say no and tried to leave the room. He blocked my exit attempts until I could shove past him. He continued to block my exit from the room, eventually cornering me against the cabinet. He held me from behind in a bear hug, and the struggle resulted in several scrapes and bruises." Yeah. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? It's just unreal. And yeah, we'll get into it. Kraig does not like to let go. After this, Karen sought and then was granted an ex parte order of protection in Boone County, Missouri on March 16th. In her petition for a protective order, Karen described like the hell that had been her marriage. Quote, "He has forced himself on me, pushed me, manhandled me, now to the point of hurting me. I am afraid it will escalate so far that someone is going to be seriously hurt." She described the ways in which she had learned over the years to keep Kraig from losing his temper. Quote, "Over time, it became apparent that Kraig is controlling. I have learned along the way that he is capable of using force. The issues vary, but I figured out how to keep things from becoming ugly. When money was the problem, I wouldn't tell him what things, groceries, clothes, etc. cost. When it was about sex, I decided it was easier to give him what he wanted every night than to refuse. On occasions I would refuse, he has been known to be forceful and mean. I am very familiar with his temper. He has been very unpredictable and mean. He has threatened me if I don't change my mind about the divorce. I'm afraid it will continue and possibly involve our kids when we do move out." Yeah, it's just, I feel so bad for Karen here, man. She's just trying to break away, trying to be happy, and, this prick just can't take no for an answer, can't take the fact that, it's over. So when Karen was granted her protective order on March 16th, it caused Kraig to be arrested. And what makes this more glorious is he was arrested that same day as he was in the middle of a city council meeting. So yeah, it was a really big deal in the local community. This was also the same day that Karen finally moved her and the children out of the home that her and Kraig had shared. Kraig would later be charged with a misdemeanor battery charge in April, although other sources said that he was charged with a third-degree domestic assault charge. So I don't know if that's the same thing, if the charges were dropped, changed, or what. Kraig would be slated to arrive in court on December 2nd later that year on these charges, and he hired attorney Rusty Antill to represent him in this case. On March 26th, he was prescribed the anti-anxiety medication clonazepam. I hope I said that right. Why do they give these medications such complicated names? But it is said Kraig never took his anti-anxiety medication at all, would never take it. And this was just the beginning of the downward spiral of Kraig and his life from the day that Karen filed for divorce. Kraig couldn't take it. He stalked Karen, harassed her, as we, were just talking about, tried to persuade her to change her mind. And as we briefly alluded to, he began, stalking Karen both physically and online. And as the days, weeks, and months passed, I guess he just grew more and more obsessed with Karen, more and more obsessed with their marriage, more and more obsessed with her relationship with Sonny. So over the summer of that year of 2009, the police were called out at least twice to Karen's home that she had moved to, still in Columbia, but this was the new home that she had moved to with her children. And neighbors said that they knew police had been called out on reports that Kraig had slashed Karen's tires and had ripped up utility cables in her yard and around her home. Yeah, this guy is seriously unhinged. Can you imagine? I get being angry that someone, is ending their relationship, especially if they're leaving you for someone else or whatever. But it is what it is. You need to get over it. You know what I mean? It's just, this is unhinged behavior. And let's keep it real. We know why he's acting like this, right? He has lost control. And guys like Kraig, people like Kraig, can't take that, especially when their things, their objects are the ones that are, going against them, right? Neighbors also said that when they asked Karen, oh, hey, should we be worried for the safety, of our own stuff? Is this, some, crackpot that's, terrorizing the neighborhood? Karen was just no, it's just my ex-husband. His anger is directed, towards me and me only. You're fine. One comment from one of her neighbors, who didn't know her too well, later said, quote, "I was not close to Karen, but we were friendly neighbors. We never saw each other outside of our neighborhood, and I was never in her home. She picked up my mail for me while I was on vacation, and I warned her son about bouncing his basketball off the bricks in between the windows of his home. Our kids have a shared backyard. Sean and Lauren would wave to me every day when they went to school. Lauren would run back inside the house every time because she would forget something, while Sean stayed inside the cold Suburban while it slowly warmed up." In July of that year, Karen had to hire a computer forensics investigator, and this investigator was named Adam Fink. And she hired Adam because she told him that her computer was constantly being attacked by a, quote, "relentless hacker We know who that is. She told Adam she believed, it was her soon-to-be ex-husband. And Adam would later say, like, what Kraig had done, which we'll get into, was just masterful. Like, he said Kraig was obviously very computer literate. Quote, in all my years of investigating computer crimes and misdeeds, I have to say he was the hardest to track down. So Adam said that he found that a remote user had changed the settings on Karen and Lauren's laptops and computers that allowed this remote user to read every piece of data that was sent or received from these devices. Isn't that scary? He also found that someone had changed the security settings on Karen's router that was located in her home, which gave outside computer systems access to her in-home network. But because Kraig was so good, all right, Adam never found any piece of like foreign software, all right, because that's sort of like what you would imagine this kind of attack would be, in the form of, right, some sort of software, right? But instead, Kraig had physically changed the router settings and port security settings, and it took a second examination by Adam for him to like figure this out. He was like, oh shite, like no wonder I didn't find any like foreign software attacking this or whatever. This mofo had physically done this, and remember, the cops had been called out to Karen's home because Kraig had ripped up, some cables. So I'm guessing that's probably when he had done all this. And I was describing this, to Jeff because he has some knowledge with this, and he was just like, I have no idea how you would even begin to go about doing that. Like, that's a lot. So yeah, Kraig was definitely very computer literate, knew exactly what he was doing. And because of what he had done, Kraig was also able to send emails from Karen and Lauren's computer and, making it seem like it was sent from them. And he actually did send emails to their friends and family disguised as them and also like disparage them. Yeah, he even created a fake MySpace profile account for Karen and called it Mommy Monster. Although other sources stated that this was in fact Karen's actual MySpace page that she herself created, and that the Mommy Monster moniker was actually like an affectionate nickname. So I'm not too sure about that one. Finally, in September of that year, 2009, Tracy, remember she was one of Karen's boot camp clients and a friend. She knew what Karen was experiencing, and Finally, Tracy went to the city council and she told the three members that she feared for Karen's safety. She explained the violent assault that had happened in March when, Kraig had her in a bear hug. And it was after Tracy told the city council this that the Columbia city manager, Bill Watkins, asked Kraig to resign from his position at the water and light department. Bill told the papers that Kraig was asked to resign because of what he described as Kraig's, quote, difficult family issues. Kraig was paid 2 months' salary and 1 month of severance. Yeah, that must be nice, right? Can you imagine getting like a severance and still getting like some sort of salary after you've been, asked to resign and all that? Must be nice. Now, as you can guess, right, things are already not going too well for Kraig here, right? He's becoming more and more unhinged, stalking and harassing your soon-to-be ex-wife, disparaging your own daughters and stuff. Like, what the hell, right? So, as you can guess, him getting essentially fired from his job in Columbia did not really do much for him, right? It just kind of added fuel to the fire that he was feeling. According to Tracy, not only did losing his job and have his wife filing for divorce upset him, but what really upset him was Karen and his daughter's growing independence. Quote, he was losing control of her. He basically tried to terrorize her into submission, and it wasn't working. As a lot of these scumbags do, right? They have a vice grip on, people they're supposed to love, and then are shocked Pikachu face when that person, tries to wrench free of them, right? Now, on October 9th, according to court filings, Kraig asked for relief from temporary monthly child/family support payments that he had to make. He had been ordered to pay $2,030 a month in child support, plus an additional $1,500 in, maintenance that he was required to provide his family. So I wasn't sure about that, if it meant like maintenance around the home or something. I don't know, I just thought that was interesting. He said in the court filings that he expected to remain unemployed for, quote, a substantial period of time, and added that by court order, he hadn't been allowed to withdraw any money from, his retirement fund until after the divorce had been, finalized and all that. Pinkleton said that Kraig had no problem at all meeting these financial requirements when he was employed, but he did state, the payments could be modified. Quote, he wasn't in the kind of financial straits that a lot of people find find themselves in these cases. And I guess Kraig had complained throughout the entire process of like the divorce and stuff, of like financial constraints and stuff. The Kaylor's divorce hearing had been slated for December 21st later that year, but a settlement hearing was slated for December 4th, and a hearing regarding child custody was slated for sometime in January of the next year, 2010. And within 6 to 8 weeks before the events of today's case, in late October, Kraig moved back to his hometown of Meriden, Kansas to live with his parents. I guess Kraig had called his father sometime in like late September, early October, and told him about having, quote, terrible thoughts. And this call is what prompted the family to have Kraig move back to Kansas with his parents to like keep an eye on him. Wayne, his father, said his son had told him, quote, I lost my family, I lost my job, and now I'm living here with my mom and dad. He also said his son, quote, felt terrible when he stumbled across a photo online, probably on like MySpace or something, and the photo was Sonny, Karen, and the kids like out enjoying stuff and whatnot. Kraig did not like seeing photos of Sonny with the children. It really upset him. But yeah, my question is like, how did he come across that photo? Probably because he was stalking Karen's every move. What are you doing? Like, don't go online and search for her, Chris, Kraig's brother, helped him move out of the home in Columbia and would later describe his brother as, quote, agitated throughout the whole process, and said his brother told him, quote, I might go out in a blaze of glory. Chris said, quote, I've never seen him in such a state before. And in November, growing more and more angry, more and more bitter, Kraig then sent an email to his soon-to-be former brother-in-law, Karen's brother, Bill. And in the email, Kraig told Bill about Karen's torrid love affair with Sonny, how the two women had supposedly had sex at like a Wichita hotel after taking the kids trick-or-treating. And Bill like just responded to Kraig that, pretty much that like, hey man, you need to get over this, all right? You need to put on your big boy pants and like get the fuck over it, He needed to, realize that his marriage to Karen was irreconcilable. This was going forward, and he just needed to, get over it. Bill told Kraig that he believed that he was driven to extremes, and that this email that he had sent him proved that he wasn't being a very good role model for any of his children. So he wasn't being a very good father. And on Saturday, November 28th, 2009, Karen, who was 44 years old, Emily, who was 18, Lauren, who was 16, and Sean, who were 10, visited Karen's grandmother, Dorothy White, who was 89. And Dorothy lived in Burlingame in Osage County, Kansas, which is about 20 miles southeast of Topeka. And this was the weekend after the Thanksgiving holiday. It was a family tradition to go see, Grandma Dorothy the weekend after Thanksgiving. Earlier that day, Karen had picked up Sean in Topeka. Sean had actually come from visiting Kraig's parents' home in Meriden, where he had actually spent Thanksgiving with them, and he hunted and fished with his grandparents and his father. Yeah, Kraig only wanted to spend Thanksgiving with Sean, but it sounded like, Emily and Lauren weren't too fond of Kraig either, so it sounded like they were kind of more than happy to spend the holiday with their mother. But Sean had spent it with his father, and earlier that morning, before his mother had picked him up, Sean had called her and asked, like, hey, can, I stay longer? He was having a really good time and wanted to spend some more time with his father and his grandparents rather. But Karen said no, that Grandma White was really looking forward to seeing him and that he needed to, come home. She was going to pick him up and they were going to go to Grandma Dorothy's house. Now, it is said Kraig was very, very upset at Karen's refusal. Very upset about this. Sean would later say, quote, when my mom said I couldn't stay any longer, my dad was mad at my mom. And so while Kraig was out depositing $7,600 into his bank account over at Denison State Bank, his mother, Patricia, took Sean to meet up with Karen and give him over. So yeah, I guess that's how upset Kraig was, is that they waited for him to leave the house to run an errand, and then his mother quickly got Sean out of the house and delivered him to Karen. Now, Brenda Fund was the bank operations manager at the bank where Kraig came to deposit his money, and she would later note that she saw Kraig that morning. I'm not sure if she waited on him, but she said he, quote, seemed no different that day than every other day, noting that he was usually his usual quiet, reserved self. He never really spoke a whole lot when he came in there, and when he did speak, it was, coherently and clearly, like it didn't seem like anything was amiss. Meanwhile, Karen, Emily, and Lauren had spent Thanksgiving over at Karen's sister's home, Lynn, who lived in Derby. And I know that same morning, Karen and Sonny had spent some time together, so I think Sonny may have also spent Thanksgiving with the whole family. And by the evening of the same day, Karen, Emily, Lauren, and Sean were at Dorothy's home, right? And they were enjoying their evening. But unbeknownst to any of them, Kraig, who was 46 years old, was lying in wait for them that evening. So later that evening, after he had gotten home from the bank, he then drove to Dorothy's home. He went out of his way to park his car, down the street from her home so they wouldn't see him. And he waited until the sun set, until nightfall, so that his movements could be covered in darkness. Now, when he first arrived in the neighborhood, and parked his car, some neighbors took note of his vehicle because of how loud it was. And some neighbors took note of him when he pulled up around 5:30, 6 p.m., somewhere around that time period. And Michelle Davidson and Trevor Gibson were the ones who noticed and heard Kraig's truck when he pulled up. They lived about a block and a half from Dorothy's home, and they, saw and heard Kraig's red Ford Explorer come by and park, and they saw that he parked on nearby Collins Street. Now, since they didn't recognize his vehicle at all, it was loud, that's what had gotten their attention, and since it also had Missouri plates, they decided to keep an eye on it, just for a few minutes, just to see what was going on. I mean, it was the holidays, maybe, some neighbors had some out-of-town family or something, right? So they decided to keep an eye on Kraig and his Ford Explorer. And as they were watching it, they saw Kraig get out of the vehicle and he started walking down the road. Quote, "We thought the person was stealing," and this was according to Michelle, which is why they continued to keep an eye on him. As he continued walking down the street, I guess that's when Trevor went out and looked at the license plate and was copying it down. And that's when they decided to call authorities. Quote, "First, I called the Burlingame Police Department, but I couldn't get a hold of anybody. They then called the Burlingame's utility department, who then said that they should call 911. And when they did, the dispatcher notified them that, hey, there's no local units in your area right now. But, just keep an eye on everything, don't do anything, don't interact, just keep an eye on everything, and, we'll dispatch a patrol unit out to that area to check it out." And let's follow Kraig. So, yeah, as Michelle and Trevor saw, he walked down the street, and he walked further down the street until he got to Dorothy's home. It was around 6 when he got to her home, and he crept around and silently entered through a back door that opened up into the kitchen. Now, at the same moment, Sean and Karen were in the kitchen. They were over the kitchen sink. They were cleaning up some coins that Sean had gotten for his coin collection. And it was as they were doing that Kraig, out of nowhere, silently, without saying a word, entered through that back door that entered into the kitchen and shot Karen with what Sean described as a deer rifle and was later identified as a .223 caliber Mac 90 assault rifle. Quote, "My dad came through the door and shot my mom. I just heard her collapse on the floor from the shot. I just caught a glimpse, but I think she was holding her leg." Sean said he immediately took off after this happened and exited the house. Quote, "The first thing I did was duck down, and then he went around the kitchen counter, and that's when I ran out the door." And as soon as he was outside, Sean said that he ran around the house. His intention was to enter through the front door of the house and going back inside. Quote, "My first thought was to go in and get a phone, so I was trying to find a way to get back in. I started opening the door and saw my dad go by again, and then I closed it." He said he heard 1 or 2 more gunshots before he bolted it for a neighbor's house, but no one was home. So he ran to another neighbor's house who he could see had people in through the window. He could see people were in there. So he went to that neighbor's house. He pounded on the door, and when they answered, quote, "I told them to call 911 because there had been a shooting across the street at Dorothy White's house. I told them my dad shot my mom, sisters, and great-grandma." Dispatch got the call at 6:15 p.m. Now, as he entered the kitchen, right, as Kraig entered the kitchen and first shot Karen, he never made a move to harm, attack, or even stop Sean from leaving the home. Instead, Kraig had just shot Karen again, then had methodically swept through the home and shot Dorothy and Emily as well. They were in the living room, and he shot Dorothy once and his own daughter twice. He then proceeded upstairs and shot his oldest child, his oldest daughter, twice in a bedroom that she was in. He then just left the home nonchalantly and headed back towards his vehicle, who, if we'll remember, Michelle and Trevor were keeping an eye on. Now, as Michelle and Trevor saw Kraig walk back to his vehicle, they saw that he was holding some sort of object, but they couldn't see what it was. But Michelle yelled at him, quote, "Hey, you, stop right there," and kind of flashed a flashlight in his face. But Kraig quickly put the object back in the vehicle and sped off before Trevor could reach him. Trevor had started approaching him, and yeah, he quickly, got the hell out of Dodge. Osage Osage County Sheriff's Deputy Nathan Perling would end up being the first officer on scene. So, Officer Perling was initially on his way to that phone call that Trevor and Michelle had phoned in. He was initially dispatched for the suspicious vehicle. Quote, I was doing paperwork here at the office when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. And as he was en route to that call, he was then alerted to a life alert call that, came from Dorothy's address. Quote, shortly after that, I was told there was a shooting at that residence. He got to Dorothy's home, grabbed his rifle, and took a position behind a tree that was in her front yard to, scope it out, make sure there was no, active shooter or whatever going on. He then proceeded to the front porch and looked in through a window. Quote, I went up to the house to see if I was at the right place for whatever was happening, and that's when I could see Dorothy from the front porch window. He saw Dorothy sitting in her living room. She was sitting in her recliner, and he saw that she had lots of blood on her. Quote, I forced my way inside. I stopped to look at her injuries and told dispatch we needed as much medical attention as we could get. Dorothy was nursing a gunshot wound to her abdomen, and after securing medical help, Perling then told dispatch about the suspicious vehicle call that he was initially called to in that neighborhood and figured that suspicious vehicle was somehow tied to this. He then proceeded to start making his way through the home, to clear it, and that's when he came across Karen on the kitchen floor. She was unconscious, she was on her back, she was very pale, and she was breathing very, very slowly. Perling also took note of the empty shell casings that were nearby, and as he was approaching, as he saw him, then started approaching Karen because he was going to check her for a pulse, he started hearing cries for help. Quote, at the same time, I could hear somebody crying for help. I heard a voice coming from upstairs. I need air. I called out and asked where they were at. I didn't get a response. And as another deputy arrived on scene to cover/assist Perling, that's when he made his way upstairs. And that's when he found poor Lauren just writhing in pain on the floor. Her whole chest was covered in blood, and she had been shot twice in the back by her own father. Quote, her right lower abdomen was growing more purple by the second. Perling tried to comfort her the best that he could. Lauren was having a lot of difficulty breathing. Kept telling her, quote, keep breathing, sweetie, keep breathing. We're gonna get you. We're gonna get you. We're gonna get to you. And just trying to do what he could to comfort her. She communicated her age with him by holding up her fingers. And this is so heartbreaking. As she lay there, scared and panicked and, struggling to breathe, she begged Perling, quote, I'm scared. I don't want to die. Hurry. I don't want to die. Isn't that heartbreaking? Perling said, quote, I tried to keep her talking to get her focus off her injuries and to try to keep her alive. Perling asked if she knew who had shot her, and she answered with, quote, my dad. He asked if she knew his name, and she said, quote, Kraig. He said after he stabilized Lauren the best he could, he headed back downstairs. I think at this time there was a lot more medical help and other police on scene. And he said it was when he was heading back downstairs that he discovered Emily on the living room floor. And unfortunately, poor 16-year-old Emily was already dead. Wallace Brennan was the emergency medical technician who had first arrived on scene, and he stabilized Dorothy. And he provided care and comfort to her as they prepared to transport her to the hospital. They transported her to the Stormont Vale Regional Health Center, which was located in Topeka. And Dorothy arrived at the hospital in critical condition. Now, as investigators and forensic technicians, started combing the scene, trying to find clues and stuff, they found 7 .223 caliber shell casings all around the home. And outside, they had also, right outside Dorothy's home in the yard, they had found a discarded men's jacket, and it had Kraig's old business card in the pocket. And a multi-agency manhunt then began for Kraig. And it involved the Kansas Highway Patrol's helicopter unit, KHP ground units, the Shawnee and Osage County Sheriff's offices, and police officers from Auburn and Topeka. Yeah, a lot of agencies were involved in this manhunt for Kraig. They blocked about 2 miles of Auburn Road between Auburn and Burlingame as air, ground, and K-9 units scoured the area looking for Kraig. Now, Kraig's SUV would later be found abandoned near the Shawnee-Osage County line. It had actually been found in a parking lot just minutes after it had passed a police officer who was coming the opposite direction. But by the time police had swarmed the vehicle, Kraig was nowhere to be seen. And they then set up a 2-mile perimeter around the area where they found his vehicle. Now, in the back of his SUV, Authorities found a long white box, and the box identified itself as holding a .223 caliber rifle, though the weapon was not inside the box and it would actually never be found. Authorities also found additional rifle clips in the car and a hiking backpack that was equipped with a bunch of supplies, as if like he planned on, I don't know, maybe living on the road or out in the woods somewhere for a while. But the supplies were stuff like soap, lotion, hand towels, toilet paper, cotton balls, beef jerky, trail mix, along with all kinds of canned goods as well. Kraig would finally be found the next day, Sunday, November 29th, at 7:27 a.m. He would be found by Shawnee County authorities after about a 12 to 13 hour manhunt had ensued for him, and 7.5 hours after his vehicle had been found abandoned. Pretty wild he was able to elude authorities that long, especially after they, caught his car, because he had just passed a deputy who quickly turned around. It's just amazing he was able to get away from his car so quickly. Kraig was ultimately captured in the area between 112th and Auburn Road, and Shawnee County Sheriff's Deputy Ed Nelson would actually be the one to bring Kraig in. Now, Nelson wasn't even assigned to the search for Kraig, the manhunt that was going on. That wasn't his assignment. He had just come on shift and was kind of just patrolling his area when a passing vehicle flagged him down. And they, asked him hey, has that murder suspect been caught yet? And Nelson was like, no, not that I know of. And they said, well, there was a suspicious man, quote, just over the hill that was walking alongside the road. And when Nelson drove a little ways down the road, he saw Kraig walking in the ditch that ran alongside the road. And later, a .223 caliber magazine would be found in that ditch. Nelson made contact with Kraig, who just told him, quote, I'm the guy you're looking for. Nelson then arrested Kraig, who offered no resistance, and just told him that he was from Colombia, that his wife had filed for divorce after having an affair with a woman. He let Officer Nelson know that he was carrying a holstered revolver and a sheath knife, a pocket knife, and $646 in cash would also be found on him. Other sources said that $1,434 was found on Kraig, but either way, a large amount of cash was found on him, as well as pliers, gloves, a flashlight, and a mesh hunting bag. Now, when Kraig was arrested, it is said that he looked like shit. He was haggard, was very skinny and lanky, and he just looked really bad. And I guess he also had a bunch of scratches all over his face and hands. So, I don't know, I get he was kind of going through the woods, I think, so maybe it was from that. But yeah, he looked like shite, and Nelson even commented, quote, he appeared to be cold, tired. Now, a former Kansas Bureau of Investigation agent, the KBI, Bill Halverson, would end up being the one to interview Kraig right after his arrest. And Halverson said that Kraig acknowledged that he did allow his wife to have an affair with a woman, but later he regretted that decision. Halverson said that Kraig never spoke directly about the killings, but never asked why he was in custody, why he was arrested, why he was there, or anything like that. Kraig refused to say anything about the murders at all, and instead just went on and on about Karen and Sonny's relationship. He said he had felt secure in his marriage of more than 20 years, and that's why he had allowed Karen to experiment. He told Halverson that he told Karen that if she wanted to, quote, try something, she should just go ahead and do it. Quote, but I don't want to lose you in the process. Just be careful. I was just trying to be nice. Yeah, Kraig, you're such a nice guy, right? What a skis. Halverson said Kraig continued on, quote, I can't believe how fast you can lose everything. I messed up. And Kraig ended up telling Halverson what would be his main defense at trial. That Karen's affair with Sonny had sent him into a downward spiral, which only quickened when Karen filed for divorce. And the last straw, according to Kraig, was him losing his job in Colombia. Kraig also told Halverson that he was upset with his daughters as well, because he felt that they picked Karen over him. How immature and idiotic is this douchewad? And the fact that Lauren and Emily had chosen Karen over him just made things that much worse. He told Halverson, quote, Lauren said she is happy and she can do what she wants. Yeah. Can you believe this blew Kraig's mind, and this made him angry that his own daughter told him yeah, mom is finally happy and she can do what she wants. She's a grown-ass woman. And this angered Kraig. Of course it did, because these are not women. These are not human beings. These are his objects. These are his things. And how dare they go against him? Come on. You know that's exactly how Kraig views his daughters and wife. Kraig said that he was also mad at Dorothy because he felt, as family matriarch, it was her duty to pressure Karen into staying in the marriage. What do you do with jackasses like this? Now, when authorities asked Kraig where the murder weapon was, where he had disposed of it, Kraig refused to say. And when Halverson pointed out, like, well, a child could come across it, like, doesn't that worry you? Kraig just assured him that it's somewhere where no child will ever find it. So the story hit the papers that following Monday, with the Kansas Attorney General's office telling the press that Kraig had been arrested on suspicion of 3 counts of capital murder in the deaths of his estranged wife and 2 daughters. They also said he was accused of attempted first-degree murder in the shooting of Dorothy, who they did identify as Karen's mother and identified as being in critical condition at the hospital. And they announced Kraig was also being charged with aggravated burglary because of the fact that he broke into Dorothy's home to commit the shootings. Now, Kraig would end up being charged with a single capital murder count because it would actually end up covering all 3 of the killings. So, Kansas state law allows the death penalty for multiple murders arising from a single, quote, scheme or course of conduct. The Attorney General's office said that they still charged Kraig with 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder in what Deputy Attorney General Barry Disney called a fallback position in case the jury did not convict Kraig on the capital murder charge. They also told the press where the murders had happened at Dorothy's home and that the bodies had been discovered Saturday night. They declined, though, to verify if Kraig's son Sean was at the scene, and this was after the Topeka Capital Journal, the local paper, reported that the police radio traffic indicated that a 10-year-old child had fled the scene. And they didn't go into too much detail when the press asked about questions of, like, previous domestic violence, but a spokeswoman for the AG's office, Ashley Anstatt, said, quote, "There's been some talk about what was going on in Columbia. Now, the affidavit that had the, like, probable cause and all the stuff that supported the AG's claims was not released to the public. It was sealed." So the press were then going to Kraig and Karen's lawyers, seeing if they would say anything. And remember, Kraig's attorney for the Columbia domestic violence charges, just told the press that Karen and Kraig were divorcing and that Kraig had moved from Columbia, Missouri to Topeka, Kansas. But that's really all he would say. Now, that very same day on Monday, when the story was hitting the papers, Kraig had his first court appearance, where Osage County District Court Judge Philip Fromm set a $10 million bond for Kraig. When Judge Fromm asked Kraig if he could afford an attorney, he said he had, quote, some funds, but Fromm still appointed the state's death penalty defense unit, which was in Topeka, to represent Kraig. And at that time, attorney Ron Evans was appointed to his case. Now, Kraig did not say anything to reporters as he was led from the jailhouse to court and then back again. Pingleton, remember Karen's divorce attorney, he spoke to the press, though. And he went on to describe, what he had learned about Kraig and the Kaylor marriage through Karen, including how much of a misogynistic prick that Kraig was, and how he had never made any efforts to see his daughters, only his son. Quote, "He never was interested in his daughters, only his son. And I think that is the reason that little boy is alive today." He informed the press that Kraig had arranged a Thanksgiving visit with Sean over the holiday, but not his daughters, of course. He also talked about, any assets that Kraig had and how he wanted to ensure that any and all assets, money or anything that Kraig had, he wanted to ensure that it all went to Sean. Quote, "Mr. Kaylor had a considerable amount of assets, and I want to make sure that those remain available to Sean and nobody else." He said the Sedgwick County District Attorney's Office and the Kansas Department of Social and Rehabilitation Services were working together to place Sean with family, and he just said, quote, "This is just a terrible, sad tragedy. Nobody had any idea he would consider doing this." Stamper, remember Kraig's divorce attorney, said that he was pretty sure that the settlement hearing that was slated for earlier in December would no longer go forward. Duh. But declined to say anything further, citing, client-attorney privilege, and just said, quote, "There's nothing I could say that could assuage the grief of either family." And the college town where Karen and the girls had lived in for less than a year all grieved for them. Tracy, one of Karen's clients and friends, remember, said, quote, "She was the source of my inspiration. I am simply devastated." A vigil was held at the university that Emily attended, and the school spokesman, Brian Daniels, told the press that the news of Emily's death and how she died, especially, really hit the students hard. Quote, "For our campus community, Emily's death is surreal. We are a small, close-knit college. This is like losing a member of the family. The school's entire student population was only 1,200. So not really shocking to see how it, really devastated the students in the community there, Nearly 900 friends would end up joining a Facebook page that was dedicated to the memory of Lauren and Emily, and there was even a YouTube memorial video posted in their memories. The city of Weatherford, Texas was also in shock. Remember, the Kaylors had lived there for, 10 years or so, had made a lot of strong community connections. So, there was a lot of people that this hit there, too. The city manager, Jerry Blaisdell, said, quote, "The community is in shock over this. I just can't fathom how someone could lose all of their human connections and engage in something like this." He also stated that as far as he was aware and as far as he knew, there were never any reports of abuse, domestic violence, or anything with the Kaylors while they lived there. Everyone thought they were just like this, picture-perfect, happy family. And unfortunately, on Tuesday, December 1st, Dorothy succumbed to her wounds, and she ended up passing away in the hospital. And the Attorney General's office announced that they were going to revise the murder charges to include Dorothy's murder in them. And on December 10th, they amended the charges to 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. And the original capital murder charge covered the 3 deaths of Karen, Lauren, and Emily. And I don't know if they couldn't, refile the capital charge or how exactly that works. But the Kansas Supreme Court had ruled that though one capital murder charge could cover multiple murders, only one capital murder charge could be filed. So I was a little unclear if they could include Dorothy's murder in the capital murder charge. Unclear. Kraig's preliminary hearing was slated for March 18th, 2010, where it would also be determined if Kraig would go to trial on 1 count of capital murder and 1 count of aggravated burglary. And the AG's office filed the 4 first-degree murder charges just in case Kraig got off on the capital murder charge, as we discussed earlier. Now, at this time, Attorney General Steve Six announced that the office hadn't yet determined if they were going to seek the death penalty or not. And by Kansas law, the prosecutor's office has only 5 days after Kraig officially entered his plea to make that decision. And the spokeswoman, Ashley Anstatt, said, quote, "At this point, all options are on the table." So Kraig's preliminary hearing would actually end up being delayed several times. And in May of 2010, in what would be one of many, many pretrial hearings, Osage County Magistrate Judge John Stevens Jones ruled that Sean would testify at his father's preliminary hearing via a closed-circuit TV. And at this point, Kraig's preliminary hearing was slated for October. In the next month, June, Judge Jones ruled against the defense, who were requesting, of course, that the case be dismissed. And they were trying to dismiss it because his lawyers were trying to argue that the case against him in Kansas had been tainted because authorities had seized documents pertaining to the divorce and that domestic violence assault charge from the state of Missouri. And they were trying to argue that the seizure of those files violated the constitutionally protected confidence between Kraig and his lawyers. But Judge Jones had ruled that any possible taint could be eliminated by not allowing the state to introduce these documents as evidence. He said the court precedents have shown that the attorney-client privileges of confidentiality shall be evoked within, quote, the strictest possible limits. So basically saying that, no, we can eliminate any, potential taint or poisoning of your client's character by the seizure of these documents by just not allowing them as actual evidence. That's not grounds to dismiss the case entirely. And then, I'm not sure when, but eventually Kraig's preliminary hearing was then delayed until December because I think one of Kraig's attorneys was retiring, so the defense then needed time to, square with that and, get a new lawyer up to date on the case and all that stuff. But the month he was going to have his preliminary hearing in December, Kraig requested to waive it altogether. And get this, he said he wanted to waive it because he didn't want to, quote, traumatize his son by having him testify. Oh, but shooting his mother and family in front of him, that's not traumatizing, right, Kraig? But having him testify is traumatizing? What an ass. So at this point, Kraig's preliminary hearing was slated for December 21st and 22nd in Osage County Court in Linden, but the Kansas Attorney General's office said that Kraig's preliminary hearing should still be held because, the prosecution also had a right to this hearing. It wasn't just about, Kraig's rights. The prosecution had a right to, bring forth their evidence and all that stuff. So they were saying, no, this should still be held. Who cares if Kraig wants it or not? So in Kansas, by state law, the state can require request the preliminary hearing, regardless if the defendant wants it or not. Now, Kraig's attorney, who is now Thomas Haney, argued that this state law in Kansas, where the prosecutor can, request the preliminary hearing regardless if the defendant wanted, was unconstitutional. And even if it, was constitutional, there was no legal reason to hold this preliminary hearing. Quote, to traumatize an 11-year-old child is uncalled for and serves no useful purpose. Haney said that he hoped to spare Sean the, quote, stress and emotional trauma of testifying. Again, it just cracks me up. It's like, you don't think, testifying is any more traumatizing than seeing his mother shot before his eyes? But Assistant Attorney General Disney argued that by state law, to waive a preliminary hearing required both the prosecution and the defense to, sign off on it, and only then could a judge then sign off on it. And then he said that the defense's contention that the law was unconstitutional had no merit. And in the end, Judge Jones rejected the defense's request, and Kraig's preliminary hearing was held as scheduled in December. Now, at the preliminary hearing, Sean testified via closed-circuit TV, as was planned, and he told the court what he witnessed. He identified the murder weapon that his father had used as the .223 caliber rifle. He said he had only seen that gun once before when the family had still lived in Texas. And he said he did recognize it, and he was able to recognize it because his father had given him a .223 caliber rifle when they still lived in Texas. He said he had also just gone deer hunting, that Thanksgiving with his grandfather's .243 caliber rifle. So yeah, he was able to identify the weapon that his father had used. At the preliminary hearing, Haney tried to excuse Kraig's actions by accusing Karen of having an affair with a man in Texas when they were living in Missouri. So I don't know if he hadn't found out about Sonny yet or what, but I thought that was super weird when I was reading the articles and I saw that he was bringing this up. Haney went on and on about how the stress of Karen filing for divorce had had a profound impact on Kraig and his work, and, affected it to the point that he was let go and fired. Haney said that Kraig had reached his tipping point when he had been fired. That was the tipping point. In the end, Judge Jones bound Kraig over on 4 alternative counts of first-degree murder, as well as the capital murder charge. He then scheduled Kraig's arraignment for February of 2011. And on February 7th, 2011, at his arraignment, the prosecution announced that they were indeed going to go for the death penalty. Assistant Attorney General Amy Hanley said that they felt the death penalty was appropriate in this case because the murders were especially heinous and they involved more than one victim. Kraig's trial was then slated for August 8th later that year. Now, in April, Kraig's attorneys tried to argue that the jury selection process was unconstitutional. So I guess it had been decided at this point that the trial would be held in Osage County, and the jurors would be picked from residents of that county who had valid driver's licenses. So Osage County, I guess, is one of 4 districts where jurors are chosen from the county in which the crime occurred, and the jury pool is drawn from only those with valid Kansas state driver's licenses. Thought that was super weird. So Kraig's attorneys, Haney, and then he had another attorney on the case as well, Amanda Vogelsberg, both argued that this jury selection process was unconstitutional. And they said it was unconstitutional because it prevented some people who would otherwise be eligible from serving. They said in their motion that they, quote, can find no case in the state of Kansas which has allowed a jury pool drawn solely based on driver's licenses. They said this method, quote, violates both the spirit and letter of the Kansas state law, and that the process, quote, draws only from that part of the district logically having the most exposure to a high-profile case and most likely to have formed opinions about such a case. Arguments about this issue were to be held in May, and I couldn't find any particular updates about that, but I'm pretty sure Judge Jones ruled against the defense. During the same month of May, Kraig tried to argue that he wanted to physically be at some custody hearing that was happening regarding Sean. It was happening in Wichita, and Kraig wanted to physically, be present, but the court denied his request. They said he could teleconference in, via telephone call, but that was it. He didn't have a right to physically be there. And at that hearing, Karen's sister Lynn ended up with custody of Sean. In June, the defense lost another motion when they wanted Kraig's statements to Agent Halverson thrown out, but Judge Fromm denied them. So yeah, I think Judge Jones ruled on some pretrial motions, but Judge Fromm would be the one who oversaw the trial. And in July July, the defense actually won a motion, and it was regarding what they were going to present as their defense at trial. They wanted to present the evidence that Karen was having an affair with Sonny, and this had led to Kraig's mental break that caused him to slaughter the women of his family. And the defense lost another request when, a week before his trial, they requested that it be moved out of Osage County, but the judge denied this. And on Monday, August 15th, 2011, Kraig's trial began. Jury selection had actually started on August 8th, and it was held in Linden, Kansas. Now, the defense opened with their argument that Kraig had snapped due to Karen's affair with another woman. He was, according to the defense, a, quote, shell of a man who was distraught that his wife of 23 years was leaving him for another woman. Haney said that the Kaylors had a perfect, happy marriage before it turned, quote, cancerous. He also accused Karen and Sonny of openly conducting their affair in front of the Kaylors' children, and they just went on about how Kraig was the perfect husband, the perfect father, doted on his family, and it wasn't until Karen's affair, the divorce, and then him losing his job that, he was finally pushed to his limit. Quote, no one but a person with serious mental illness would do what Mr. Kaylor did. He had a psychotic break and he snapped. What happens when someone who's rigid is put under too much pressure? They snap. And then I guess he snapped a pencil to emphasize his point or whatever. Now, the defense was putting the blame squarely on Sonny and said that she was the homewrecker who had dissolved the whole marriage. It was all Sonny's fault. And you get why, right? Why they're attacking Sonny. Because if they attack Karen and kind of paint her as some hussy who had an affair on her husband, blah, 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 that's not going to look too well to the jury, right? She's a victim. She was murdered in cold blood by Kraig, right? So, who do they go after? The one that's left, Sonny. So the defense contended that, Sonny entering the picture plus Kraig losing his job had just, piled up, and, him losing his job was what just caused him to finally snap after all the pressure that Sonny had caused. So they pointed to a few facts about the crime that pointed to the fact that Kraig was not really in his right mental state of mind, that he had snapped. They pointed to the fact that Kraig had driven his own vehicle to the scene, had made no attempts to conceal his identity, and even pointed to the fact that his car was noisy, which alerted Michelle and Trevor, remember? And they said that this proved that he wasn't really thinking this through when he did it. Quote, that is not a premeditated plan. It is the act of a man who is broken, who has snapped. Now, the prosecution, led by Osage County Prosecutor Brandon L. Jones, and then Assistant Attorney Amy Hanley, we talked about her earlier, contended that Kraig had purposely and maliciously premeditated the murders, that he had coldly and methodically picked off every female in that house, and pointed to the fact that every shot that was fired, the 7 shots that were fired in that home, were not wasted. Each shot was methodical, and Kraig was an avid hunter, so he knew how to shoot. Hanley said, quote, you can decide whether a man who refers to his daughters as rotting corpses is traumatized. He decided the only way to take control was to commit murder. When they were no longer the Cleavers, no longer perfect, he kills them. The prosecution then opened with kind of the cold, hard facts that sort of put Kraig at the scene, including Sean's testimony, and they didn't really discuss a motive. Quote, the defendant proceeded to go through the home, targeting each and every one of the females in that home. And this was according to Prosecutor Jones. And based on these opening statements and opening arguments, the trial was predictably going to be about Kraig's sanity. Was he too mentally ill to premeditate anything? Or was this just a cold, methodical plan on Kraig's part? So the prosecution brought in testimony from all the forensic technicians to, again, place Kraig at the scene. They found Kraig's blood in Dorothy's home. A sample of his blood had matched blood that was found on the stairwell handrail of her home, and there was also some found on a wall. A DNA analyst who worked for the KBI, Britton McMahon, testified to these DNA matches, but McMahon actually testified via a pre-recorded interview because they were actually over in Afghanistan at that point in time working for the U.S. Army. A KBI forensic scientist named Kelly Woodward testified that several fingerprints fingerprints found at the scene could not be conclusively matched to Kraig, even though I don't even know why that matters, because you have witness testimony on top of other forensic evidence, but whatever. The prosecution then moved on to showing the grisly crime scene photos, which were pretty bad. One of the jurors, gasped and covered their mouth, oh my god, it was pretty hard. Kraig did not look up at all or look at the photos. And it was during the showing of one of these photos that the forensic pathologist, Eric Mitchell, who was a coroner in nearby Shawnee County and had conducted the autopsies, stated on the stand, quote, "What we have here is execution style, even though none of the victims were shot in the head." And Mitchell explained that it was the weapon choice in these murders that made this an execution. And it was due to the .223 caliber ammunition, which is designed to stay stable while it's in flight, but as soon as it hits an object, such as the human body, it's designed to tumble and cause mass damage. Quote, "It's designed specifically to transfer all its energy to the target. I find personally that it does so very effectively." He testified that Emily had been shot through the breast, and she likely would have survived that injury if she had not received a second shot that was to her back and severed her spinal cord, instantly paralyzing her. Lauren had been shot twice in the back and buttocks, with the back shot destroying her liver, while the shot to her buttocks, tore up her intestines. And Mitchell said that both of these wounds were fatal, and that particles that were found on Lauren's back indicated that Kraig was only 2 to 4 feet away when he shot his daughter. Karen, Mitchell testified, was shot in the leg. Remember, Sean saw that. And the bullet entered and exited her body, shattering her femur. And she was shot the second time in her back, which struck her liver, stomach, and diaphragm. Dorothy was shot in the left arm, but as the bullet exited her arm, it blew out a large chunk of her elbow, and the fragmented bullet continued going, and it entered Dorothy's abdomen, creating a very large injury wound. Isn't that gnarly? She was just shot in the arm, but it just was a clean enter and exit, and it continued on into her abdomen. That's awful. Pingleton, Karen's divorce attorney, testified, and his testimony was mainly brought in to combat the defense's claim of, Karen and Sonny's affair being the reason that the marriage dissolved. He also countered and said what Karen had told him, that it was Kraig who had facilitated this affair to begin with. He testified that Karen had told him it was Kraig who had introduced Sonny to Karen, and that this in turn turned into them two engaging in an affair, which he testified then led to the breakdown of the marriage. Quote, "Karen indicated to me that Kraig wanted to bring another partner into the marriage. She indicated to me that Kraig wanted to do a threesome." And he also verified that it was Karen who told him that Kraig was the one who had introduced Sonny sexually into the relationship. Because there were some people who were like, wait, how could Kraig have introduced Sonny to the relationship when Karen had been working with Sonny since 2006? But Pingleton was saying, well, Karen told me that Sonny was introduced sexually into the relationship via Kraig. So not sure about that. He described what Karen had told her about her marriage, how, Kraig was controlling and abusive. And I guess Karen had even given her attorney some colored photographs of some bruises she had received from Kraig. These photos were shown in court, but they weren't color photographs. They had just been Xeroxed, so they were black and white. And Pingleton admitted that he didn't know what date the photos had been taken. They weren't dated, and he didn't know who had taken them. Just that Karen had given them to him when she was preparing for the divorce. Now, on cross-examination, Pingleton admitted that he hadn't interviewed Sonny or any of the Kaylor children, and the defense got him to admit that he did not know for certain how Kraig had introduced Sonny to Karen. Now, Hanny just dismissed, everything that Pingleton was saying, his whole testimony, and he was arguing that Kraig's mental health was already deteriorating and that, Karen's affair had just exacerbated it. He stated that Kraig began having, hallucinations and was obsessed with Karen and Sonny's relationship, as well as with, the divorce. He said all of Pingleton's testimony was just speculation, to which Pingleton replied it was a, quote, informed opinion that he had gotten based on what Karen had told him. Now, after the trial, Hanny told the press that he never heard about this tidbit of, Kraig being the one to introduce Sonny into the relationship, and he said, quote, "Mr. Kaylor's accused of doing a number of things. That's one I think is just a fantasy. Sean, who is now 12 years old, also testified at his father's trial, and his testimony lasted about 28 minutes, and he repeated what he had seen and done that day as he had at the preliminary hearing. And when Sean testified, because he testified in person, this was the first time Kraig had physically seen his son since the day of the murders. It was said Kraig smiled, looked so proud and beamed at his son as he entered the courtroom, but Sean, completely ignored his father, didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him. The only time he looked at his father briefly was when he was asked to openly identify him in court. Sean held a tennis ball with a smiley face on it all throughout his testimony and said that after his father had shot his mother, quote, "I was scared, so I didn't look into his father's eyes." He said, quote, "I ducked down, and then once he passed, I ran out the door, the same door that his father had just entered from. Outside, quote, I went to the porch door on the south side of the house. I looked through the door window, and I saw my dad's silhouette go by, back towards the kitchen." And at the end of his testimony, when Sean was asked, if after everything his father had done, did he still love his father? And Sean looked briefly at his father for only the second time, and then answered, quote, "Not really." And yeah, I don't blame him. How could he still love his father? He took away his mother and sisters, his whole family, his whole immediate family. I saw some comments of people talking about Sean's testimony, and yeah, I guess there was some video clips of local news channels that had it, but none of the links worked anymore. But there were people discussing these videos that weren't up anymore, and a lot of people were saying that to them, Sean's testimony came off as if he almost blamed himself. It was he thought if he hadn't asked his mother if he could stay longer, his father wouldn't have gotten upset and his mother and sisters wouldn't have been killed. Isn't that heartbreaking that this poor little 10-year-old, because he was 10 at the time, carries the blame for this when there's only one person to blame, and that's Kraig. Halvorsen also testified, but again, with that DNA analyst, it was via a pre-recorded interview because he was, again, over in Afghanistan working for the U.S. Army, the same as that DNA analyst. And, the video, of course, was aired in court, and in the video, Hanny asks Halvorsen if Kraig was obsessed with his marriage, and Halvorsen just replied with, quote, "I think that's a very good word to use." A friend of Karen's named Liz McKayley? I hope that's how you say her name. But Liz testified, and she testified to a lot of the abuse that Karen had confided in her about. And I was a little unclear if Liz was a friend from Texas or Missouri, but she testified that Karen had confided in her how, Kraig wanted her to count for every single penny, and how, he expected her to have sex with him every night, which I guess, according to Liz, Karen described to her as, quote, one of her chores. Isn't that heartbreaking? And Liz said that she developed the impression over time that Kraig was, quote, controlling, to say the least. Sunny, of course, also testified, and her testimony, of course, was the one that everyone was the most curious about. Her testimony had the most anticipation. It would last for an hour and 45 minutes. And in her testimony, she stated that she had known Karen since 2006, but that the relationship hadn't turned sexual until about mid-2008. She said Karen began confiding in her about her unhappy, abusive marriage, how unhappy she was, how she, was reluctant to move to Colombia. Quote, "The closer we got, she revealed things disturbing to me." Now, Hanny argued to Sunny that Kraig never really consented to their affair. Quote, "To keep his marriage alive, he was willing to consent to a sexual relationship between her and you." But Sunny pushed back against this whole argument, and she stated that it was Kraig who had initiated everything. It was Kraig who wanted everything. And it was Kraig who had proposed the idea of a threesome. Now, the defense pushed back really hard against this claim of Sunny's, and Hanny said, quote, "You don't have anything other than your testimony today that Kraig Kahler suggested a threesome?" And Sunny answered, quote, "No, sir, it's my word." She maintained, quote, "Karen told him about it, the affair. He told her to get it out of her system. They were moving to Colombia anyway." And after getting a little annoyed with Hanny's question about, exact dates and timelines of when certain things were said or done or started, Sunny just said, exasperated, quote, "It was such a close friendship and bonding. It's not like I wrote down a specific date when something physical happened. It wasn't a decision. It was an evolution. Kraig was very much in favor of it. There was never any secret. There was never any time he didn't know about it." She countered the defense's portrayal of Kraig being a loving, devoting husband and father, describing the marriage as a, quote, very abusive relationship. She described the abuse that Karen told her she had suffered suffered, though the defense did get Sunny to admit that she herself had never witnessed any of these physical altercations. This was all stuff that Karen had told her. Sunny also pushed back against the defense when, Hanny brought up, in 23 years of marriage, there wasn't a single domestic violence complaint filed, by Karen against Kraig or anything like that. But Sunny pushed back against this hard, saying that, it's very common to have abusive relationships and not have any record of domestic violence or reports or anything like that. She spoke about how she was told it was the children who would come in and save Karen from Kraig, and she testified that it was the children themselves who had told her this. She testified that her only interest in the Kaylor's marriage was protecting and looking out for Karen. Quote, I wanted to protect her. I thought I could. I would have loved for her to be with me, but the circumstances weren't right. I loved her. I wanted her to be safe, with or without me. And when Hanny tried to paint her as a home wrecker, she just shot back, quote, if I was out of line, then I was, but I loved her too much. I would have loved for her to be with me if the circumstances were right, but the circumstances weren't right. Hanny also tried to downplay and completely misconstrue the incident that happened at New Year's Eve party. He accused Sunny and Karen of both being drunk and said that it was because Karen was intoxicated that she fell that caused her injuries. Kraig didn't push her. No. Karen had just gotten, blackout drunk and had tripped and fallen. Okay. Now, Sunny admitted that, she didn't witness the incident, just that, she came across Karen later that evening after that incident had occurred, and that's what Karen had told her, that Kraig had pushed her. Sunny also identified Lauren's voice in a 30-second audio clip that was shown in court, or I guess heard in court. Technically. It had been captured by Dorothy's life alert system, which was connected to a private security and medical security monitoring system. And this was, in her home. That's how Perling had gotten that life alert ping. So the gun smoke from the gunfire had actually set off Dorothy's smoke alarms at 6:07 p.m., which was also connected to her life alert system. And in the audio that was played in court, you can hear Lauren screaming and pleading for help. Just reading about it was really tough. I can't imagine having to listen to that audio clip. But she said, quote, somebody's going to kill us. Somebody's trying to kill us. He's in the house. And in response to the operator's statement, she said, quote, he's shooting us. Help. He's in the house. Somebody's got a gun. He's shooting at us. He's in our house. Help. We need police. It was said all throughout her testimony, Sunny was very wide-eyed and very nervous. It was very meek, which, I don't blame her. I can't imagine testifying in court, even if I, hadn't done anything, even if I was just a witness or whatever, that would be really nerve-wracking. I guess she often stumbled and stammered throughout her testimony because she had trouble remembering specific dates. And she often looked to Judge Fromm for help when the prosecution constantly interrupted the defense's questioning of her, which I guess is what took up most of her testimonial time. Kraig's parents and brother testified to, seeing his deteriorating condition. They reiterated how they saw how depressed he was and how, that's what caused them to make him move in with his parents in Kansas. Wayne said he got a phone call from his son sometime in late October 2009 when he complained about being in his 4,000 square foot home all alone, and he accused Karen and the girls of, quote, trashing it on their way out. He recounted how his son told him about the terrible thoughts he had and how that phone call led the family to, intervening and making him move back to Kansas. Quote, Kraig was so down in the dumps, and Wayne just stated how the whole family thought Kraig was suicidal, not murderous. He said his son was so bitter about everything that he said he could, quote, just do away with both of them. And Wayne at the time assumed he meant Karen and Sunny. The defense also brought in 3 former co-workers of Kraig to kind of testify sort of to the same thing that his family had testified to, that his condition was getting worse and worse. His administrative assistant from Texas, when he worked in Weatherford, Christine Williams, testified, and she testified pretty much to the same thing that everybody in Weatherford said, that, they seemed like a perfectly happy family from the outside, how Kraig was professional, efficient, and his family was his number one concern. One coworker named Michael Schmitz, who worked with Kraig in Columbia, testified to what he saw from an outsider looking in, that Kraig was, quote, obsessed with his marriage and keeping this picture perfect-esque family unit intact, and that this obsession had caused a bunch of distractions at work. Another coworker and friend named Victor Holtorf, who was actually the best man at Kraig and Karen's wedding, stated that Kraig really didn't seem like himself in the months before the murders and, quote, sounded hollow in the days leading up to them. And then the city manager, Watkins, also testified to Kraig's deterioration and how his work had suffered and all that. So the defense, basically setting up what they've been saying is that he was on this downward spiral, he was so mentally unwell, and, here's all the witnesses that, saw that deterioration. And all of these witnesses testify that they noticed this decline in Kraig after Karen's affair with Sonny. Now, to bolster their position even more, the defense brought in a psychiatrist, Stephen Peterson, who testified that Kraig's depression was so severe after the divorce filing that, in his opinion, Kraig couldn't avoid doing what he did. Quote, for that moment, he had completely lost control. It wasn't rational thinking. So Dr. Peterson had interviewed Kraig a total of 7 times between April and September of 2010, and he conducted psychiatric tests, went over all the evidence, and also interviewed Kraig's friends and family. He stated Kraig had a rigid personality and was unsophisticated in his understanding of others' emotions. That sounds like a fancy way of just saying he was an asshole. Dr. Peterson also testified that during the divorce, Kraig had become, quote, obsessively focused on Karen and her relationship with Sonny, and was also obsessed with publicly humiliating Karen so that she would come back to him. He said Kraig didn't understand that this behavior, quote, would only kill the relationship. It consumed him. That's very serious depression. He lost a great deal of his judgment. He stated this showed in how Kraig had conducted the murders, calling the shootings haphazard, and pointing out that Kraig didn't move through the home like a, quote, SWAT team, and didn't shoot his victims in the heart or head. Now, on cross-examination, one of the prosecutors, Hanley, got Peterson to acknowledge, though, that every shot that left Kraig's gun did hit its intended target. Quote, obviously he was able to shoot them and do it efficiently, but he went there under the umbrella of his severe depression. So one of the reasons that the defense was pushing really hard on this aspect right here is in the state of Kansas, when a defendant's mental state is in question, jurors are not asked to consider whether they believe a defendant understood whether their alleged actions were criminal. They are asked instead to consider whether the defendant's mental state prevented them from forming the specific intent to kill and from reflecting on any actions they may take. Richard Bonney was a University of Virginia professor of law, medicine, and psychiatry, said that Kansas's standard is much narrower compared to other states. So even delusional reasons for criminal behavior would not be enough to void a conviction in Kansas. He said even under the insanity defense in most states, rage or loss of control isn't a sufficient enough excuse to avoid conviction either. Quote, the defendant usually loses. Any of us, you and me included, who would be sitting on a jury would be skeptical. I think there's a natural skepticism. And to combat Dr. Peterson's testimony, the prosecution brought in their own psychiatrist, Dr. William Logan, who examined Kraig only once in March of 2011. And he said, quote, my conclusion was that he was depressed but retained the ability to premeditate. I would not classify this as snapping. And on August 25th, the jury, after only 2 hours and 15 minutes of deliberations, found Kraig guilty of 4 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, aggravated burglary, and the capital murder charge, which, remember, encompassed all of the murders. After the verdict, Haney, the defense attorney, said that the only deal the state would offer to his client was to plead guilty to the capital murder charge. Quote, they wouldn't allow anything else, and so by going to trial, we're in exactly where we were based on their offer. Plus, we have appeal rights. Now, Hanley and the other members of the prosecution, including Karen's family, refused to comment publicly to the press until after Kraig's sentencing. Corinne Clark, whose mother was actually related to Dorothy through marriage, attended and followed the trial, and she told the press, quote, I didn't see any other outcome. This was what we had hoped for, the one thing we'd prayed for. And on August 29th, the sentencing hearing was held. And here, of course, the defense was arguing for life in prison, maintaining that Kraig was emotionally out of control and was in the throes of severe depression when he slaughtered his family. They even presented 2 notes that Sean had written to the court pleading for his father's life. One read, quote, I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. And the other one read, quote, I do not want my whole family gone. But prosecutors argued that Kraig, in keeping with the stereotype of his profession, was solving what he perceived as a problem. They contended that Kraig was depressed when he went to Dorothy's home that night, but he was also angry. And they said he decided murder was the way to eliminate these problems from his life when they no longer suited him. And the jury jury took only 55 minutes to recommend the death penalty for Kraig, which Kansas has actually not carried out since 1965, even though it was reinstated in 1994. Karen's family, so her sister Lynn, her brother Bill, and his wife Donna, along with a cousin named Carmen, all attended the trial, and they read a statement that was, read to the press by Lynn, and they said after the sentencing hearing, quote, "For the past year and a half, we've had a dark cloud around us that we associated with this trial. Now that it's over, the cloud is still there. The cloud wasn't about the trial. It is about our loss. The verdict and sentence doesn't bring our family back. The Kaylors, Whites, Dettons, and Hetricks still have a lot of healing to do." And Hanny declined to speak to the press after the sentence recommendation. Paige Shipma, remember Lauren's best friend from high school in Columbia, commented that she wasn't sure if her friend would have wanted her father to get the death penalty, but after Sean had testified, she felt differently. Quote, "They asked Sean, 'Do you still love your father?' And he said, 'Not really. I didn't want to say that I wanted him to get the death penalty before, because I wasn't sure if that's what Lauren would want. But after hearing what Sean testified to, I'm glad he's being considered for it.'" Paige had been subpoenaed to testify at the trial, but she never actually had to testify. And on October 11th, Judge Fromm took the jury's recommendation and officially sentenced Kraig to death. He also ordered Kraig to stay in the courtroom as Karen's family and friends read their victim impact statements. The defense had tried to get Judge Fromm to allow Kraig to go back to his cell so he wouldn't have to hear him. But yeah, the judge was like, "Nah, fuck you. He has to sit here and listen to this." Lynn spoke, of course. She spoke about the last time she saw her sister and nieces, which was Halloween and Thanksgiving of 2009. And it included a trip to the Riverwalk in downtown Wichita. She added that Sonny was also at these holidays with them and they had a lot of fun. Some people were wondering if she kind of did that as a little dig at Kraig because remember we mentioned this earlier, Kraig got super triggered when he saw photos of Sonny and Karen and the kids together having a good time. Lynn then added a jab that included the fact that she could go out, and enjoy the day after this. And I guess Kraig muttered under his breath, quote, "A beautiful sunny day outside." Patricia, Karen's mother, was too frail and old to attend the trial physically, but she wrote a statement that was then read in court, and she stated that she was very upset that her granddaughters had been killed, quote, "just because they were guilty of loving their mom. I lost 3 generations of loved ones in one fell swoop, and to this day, I still replay that frightening night over and over in my mind, just like watching an old movie reel. I try so hard to rewrite the end, but there is no such option." I feel so sorry for Karen's mom. Can you imagine, losing your own mother, and then your daughter, and your granddaughters in, one action? That's awful. Patricia also stated in her statement that was read that she was grateful she was able to be with her mother before she died. Quote, "I got to be with my mother until she died on December 1st. She spoke about having to clean up the home that she had grown up in, Dorothy's home, and stated that even after, all the new paint, all the new wallpaper, new furniture, new everything, she knew that her childhood home would be, quote, hell and horror for her from this point forward." Lynn told the court, quote, "I miss her every day, some days more than others. I still want to pick up the phone and call her. I hear the phone ring. I want to pick up the phone and say, 'Hi, sister.' There are no words of how deeply I hurt because of these tremendous losses. I loved Grandma White, Karen, Emily, and Lauren very much, and we will miss them until the end of my days." Sean declined to attend his father's sentencing hearing, and all throughout, it is said Kraig just kind of remained very stone-faced and emotionless. He declined to address the court or speak even after he was sentenced to death. On his way out, Kraig only told his parents that he lost everything, and to take care of his son. Quote, "Take care of Sean so he's not raised by a bunch of freaks," seemingly taking a pot shot at Karen's family. Remember, Lynn was raising Sean now. Karen's family are the freaks. You are the asshole who went and slaughtered every female member of your family, so fuck you, you're the freak, Kraig. Hanny said afterward, quote, "It was clearly anticipated. There's never been a judge in Kansas that's overturned a jury's recommendation. But on December 16th, 2016, with new defense attorney Marital Carver Almond, Kraig tried to get his case heard before the Kansas State Supreme Court. Now, Carver Almond was arguing that Judge Fromm had tilted the trial proceedings against Kraig. She accused the judge of overturning overstepping, including, she contended, questioning in a way that, quote, suggests the judge was helping the prosecutor. She also accused the judge of limiting prospective jurors from voicing their opinion during jury selection and telling them that they could not ask open court questions about witnesses or evidence or during their deliberations. Quote, the two sets of rules here for the trial, prosecution, and defense is really part of the problem. This trial wasn't about who was pulling the trigger that night. This trial was about the state of mind of who was pulling the trigger that night. An attorney representing the state, Christopher Ailsleger, countered that, quote, everything the trial court did is something that, by law, they're allowed to do, including the prosecutors being allowed to interrupt the defense during their opening arguments, because that was something else that Carver Almond was accusing the judge of allowing to happen. And on February 10th, 2018, the Kansas Supreme Court rejected all of the defense's arguments and upheld Kraig's death penalty conviction. But Kraig's appeals were not done yet. In March of 2019, Kraig's defense then successfully petitioned the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. They wanted the court to answer the question whether it was constitutional for states to abolish the insanity defense. Washington lawyer Jeffrey Green told the court, quote, in Kansas, along with 4 other states, it is not a defense to criminal liability that mental illness prevented the defendant from knowing his actions were wrong. So long as he knowingly killed a human being, even if he did it because he believed the devil told him to, or because a delusion convinced him that his victim was trying to kill him, or because he lacked the ability to control his actions, he is guilty. The other states are Alaska, Idaho, Montana, and Utah. Now, after the Supreme Court agreed to take up Kraig's case, Carver Almond told the press, quote, a favorable decision in this case would make it clear that the Constitution requires that a defendant be able to understand the difference between right and wrong before being found guilty, and in cases like Mr. Kaylor's, put to death. We're hopeful that in taking Mr. Kaylor's case, the United States Supreme Court has indicated a desire to find that the Constitution requires better of us in our treatment of mentally ill defendants. It is unclear how often an insanity defense would be used in Kansas because the state hasn't had one for so many years now. Without the option, seriously mentally ill defendants are often left to go to trial with little to no defense or forced to plead guilty on bad terms. Kansas State Attorney General Derek Schmidt countered all of her arguments, saying that Kansas hadn't abolished the insanity defense, they had just modified it. He said that the state's current law is constitutional. Quote, we think the state's approach, providing for an insanity defense based on mental disease or defect, satisfies constitutional requirements. We look forward to defending the statute and arguing our case before the justices this fall. And in October, the Supreme Court did take up Kraig's case, although Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Elena Kagan, suggested that even if Kraig were to win his case and could plead insanity, he would not get a reprieve of his conviction. She told the defense that in no state, quote, would your client be found insane. Now, at the hearing before the Supreme Court, Sarah Schrupp, who was one of the attorneys representing Kraig, argued, quote, for centuries, criminal culpability has hinged on the capacity for moral judgment to discern and to choose between right and wrong. The insane lack that capacity. This understanding of insanity has persisted since the 1500s and remains the rule in 48 jurisdictions today. But Kansas scrubs moral capacity from its criminal law and runs afoul of amendments governing cruel and unusual punishment and the due process of law. As criminal law evolved, the drafters moved to more precise mental states. When they did that, though, they retained the compelling mechanism to show insanity. We could do that, the drafter said, because we kept this narrow remnant of common law criminality. Now, one of the attorneys arguing for the state, Elizabeth Prelogger, countered this argument and stated the Kaylor case, quote, suggests that this court should recognize a theory of moral culpability and impose that uniformly across the states. But the problem with that approach is there has been no agreement on the precise circumstances when mental illness should excuse criminal responsibility. There is a basic divide on when someone should be entitled to invoke the insanity defense. And this gets to the difference between legal wrong and moral wrong. Imagine the defendant who hears voices that command him to kill in order to save the human race. He knows that murder is a crime and that he'd be violating the law, but he thinks the action is morally justified because of his mental illness. In a substantial number of jurisdictions, he would be entitled to invoke the insanity defense. And so, to try to recognize or articulate a theory of moral culpability has no roots in history and would actually raise the possibility of challenging state laws across the nation. And on Monday, March 23rd, 2020, the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, ruled in Kansas's favor, saying that they could restrict the outlines of the insanity defense while not violating the defendant's constitutional rights. Now, there are fears that this decision could make states tighten their standards for their own insanity defense. Kagan wrote, quote, Kansas takes account of mental health at both trial and sentencing. It has just not adopted the particular insanity defense Kaylor would like. That choice is for Kansas to make, and, if it wishes, to remake and remake again as the future unfolds. Justice Stephen Breyer wrote for the dissenting justices, and he stated Kansas, quote, has eliminated the core of a defense that has existed for centuries, that the defendant, due to mental illness, lacked the mental capacity necessary for his conduct to be considered morally blameworthy. Now, after this decision, Kraig had exhausted all of his direct appeals, but further appeals are still possible, as we'll get into, through collateral attacks on the conviction or sentence in both state and federal courts. And on January 19th, 2023, this year, Kraig then filed a civil suit in Osage County Court against the state of Kansas for allowing juror misconduct and contending that his prior defense team did an inadequate job of selecting jurors for his trial. He is currently being represented by attorney Julia S. Spainauer of the Kansas Capital Habeas Office, which is based in Topeka. In his 27-page petition, Kraig is seeking to vacate his convictions and sentence by using a state law that allows a prisoner to claim the right to be released on grounds that a sentence was imposed in violation of the Constitution or laws of the U.S. or the state of Kansas. The court was without jurisdiction to impose such a sentence or other grounds. And I guess it's known as KSA 60-1057. And it provides prisoners a filing time of 1 year from the last time an appellate court exercised jurisdiction in their case. And after the Supreme Court ruled against him in 2020, the Kansas Supreme Court subsequently mandated Osage County District Court to execute judgment of that order on May 5th, 2022, which started the 1 year filing time. In his petition, Kraig's legal team cites 14 different motions / reasons that he should be granted his request, 12 of which assert that he received ineffective counsel at his trial and during his appeals process. He complained that the jury wasn't sequestered and that the failure of both Judge Fromm and his defense team to do this resulted in instances of juror misconduct that included jurors discussing the case amongst themselves before deliberations. The petition cited a mother-daughter duo who were jurors, and I guess they traveled in the same car to and from the courthouse, and allegedly they were overheard discussing the case amongst themselves and talking about Kraig's guilt before the deliberations began. The petition also claimed there was at least one juror who had personal intimate knowledge / connection to the victims. Quote, Mr. Kaylor will show that one jury member had direct personal knowledge and experience inside the residence where the victims were killed, and discussed this knowledge and experience during deliberations. Mr. Kaylor will show that at least one juror knew at least one or more of the homicide victims in either a personal or a professional connection. Mr. Kaylor will show that jurors called to serve in the case had long-standing business or personal relationships with the White family. Many in the pool of jurors called to hear the case were familiar with the case and crime scene. The petition cited that due to the small, tight-knit community of Osage County, which it called sparsely populated, it was imperative that Kraig's trial be moved outside the county, but that his defense team had failed to win this argument, including the petition alleges failing to compile and analyze media exposure of the case. Quote, Mr. Kaylor will show that the Topeka Capital Journal regularly reported on the facts of the case, and then those accounts were picked up by local television stations and broadcast on nightly news programming across area networks. The media accounts adversely impacted and prejudiced the relatively small pool of potential jurors. The suit also alleged that prosecutors failed to reveal Sean's pleas for his father's life until the trial's penalty phase, which they said didn't allow Kraig's defense team adequate time to investigate or develop Sean as a witness. Quote, before the prosecution's error, the son's plea for his father's life would have been completely investigated and developed for the jury's consideration, and their decision would have been for life in prison rather than a death sentence. Kraig is currently being held under special management at El Dorado Correctional Facility, located in El Dorado, Kansas. And as of the recording of this video, an execution date has not been set for Kraig, and it will not be set until he exhausts all of his appeals. And this current attempt by Kraig to overturn his conviction may not be his last attempt. So although he has exhausted all of his direct appeals, as we talked about earlier, and his sentences have been affirmed, further appeals are still possible, and if this current petition is accepted, he will retain the right to appeal the court's final decision on this matter. Now, the most recent update I could find was from an article dated of June of this year, and it stated that the Kansas Attorney General's office, who had actually been attempting to block the Kansas Capital Habeas Office from representing Kraig, ceased their attempts at this, and a preliminary hearing for this issue is currently slated for October 16th, 2023 in Osage County District Court at 1 p.m. local time. And that is the latest update in this case. And wow, what do y'all think? That was the case of Kraig Kahler, who's a misogynistic prick who decided to slaughter and murder every female member of his immediate family. Can you believe it? Like, this guy, what a prick. What a prick. When I was reading, like, what he expected Karen to do and shit, like, I just couldn't believe it. And look at him, dude. He looks like a skis. Like, I don't know what Karen could have ever possibly seen in this guy, but fuck Kraig. He's exactly where he belongs. And just real quick, like, yeah, the insanity defense is super important, right? And it really frustrates me that we have an important question like this, questioning Kansas's, insanity defense. Like, do they not allow really an insanity defense, Like, that's a legitimate question, but it sucks that this is the case that brought forth that question, because I'm sorry, no, Kraig knew exactly what he was doing. I don't care that his little fifis were hurt, that his wife left him and was tired of his bullshit. I don't care. I think even though he was depressed, I think he was bitter and angry. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had stalked and harassed Karen and the girls for months before he did this. Nah, I'm not buying that he wasn't able to premeditate this. I absolutely believe that he could. But yeah, let me know what you all think. Have y'all heard of this case? I was so floored when I read about this case. Family annihilators, man, they really screw with my mind, man. They really stick with me. And yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and leave y'all here. Looking at my monitor here, my battery is about to die, so let me hurry up and sign off. I hope you all have a wonderful, fantastic week. Let me know your thoughts on this case down below. And remember, when you're out there in the world, don't be a dick. Just leave a little sparkle wherever you go. Thank you so much for hanging out with me this week, guys. Take care. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.